key pauper that he was talking about was the late senator from my state, Tennessee. He did a lot to destroy the drug industry, and I found after he died he had a pretty good chunk of drug stock, different types on this thing, and we didn't we didn't lose the leadership in this area. It was given away by the politicians. That makes a big difference. With the government push to standardize every individual in the United States, ought to be enough to put everybody on notice that you can standardize something like bolts and nuts, but you cannot standardize individuals. But they say they are doing this simply to control costs, that the costs are going up. But to blame anybody down at our level for the cost of anything is asinine. They have talked to and led the women to believe that they could blame the butcher for the price of meat, the storekeeper for the price of vegetables, and the farmer for anything he sends in. This is asinine. Instead of picketing the grocerman and the butcher, if they would picket the White House and the Congress, you would be getting at the seat and treating the disease that is responsible for the decreased buying power of the dollar, inflation, etc., and this would be getting down to the point where it really counts. Mr. Wooley, would you tell us a little more about it?
Dr. Dorrity, members of the 11th New England Rally for God, Family, and Country, Mrs. McKinney, Colonel Bunker, and you people that are in the audience today and have been the last 2 or 3 days and will be tomorrow, you are the patriots from throughout the country celebrating the Declaration of Independence of this great country. From time immemorial, we have had to have government. It is a necessary evil. Miraculously, and almost as a divine inspiration, our forefathers put together in a constitution the first and most effective instrument for protecting the citizens of a country from the tyrannical power of government itself. When the citizens in Philadelphia heard about the Constitutional Convention, they gathered around as it was ending, and someone asked Benjamin Franklin, "What is it that we have?" He said, "It is a republic if we can keep it." Government has been the instrumentality of destroying the freedom of mankind throughout all history. And once again, during the past 40 years, it has been going on here in the United States. Everyone here knows that this is a fact. The politician who tries to deceive the people that it is not occurring, the ordinary man in the street knows that we're in trouble. I was talking to a group of doctors not too long ago about how the Fabian socialist conspiracy of Beatrice Webb, Sidney Webb, George Bernard Shaw, Graham Wallace, and all the rest that are well known to you. I was explaining how they had come over here in 1905 and set up the cells to get on with their vicious work of putting government in control here in this country as it was in control in many places in Europe. There was a Polish doctor in the audience. After I finished, he came up to me and he said, now this Polish doctor, incidentally, had risked his life to get out of Poland. He'd come through the Iron Curtain, and if he'd been caught, as you well know, he would have suffered the penalty of death. He said, but that can't happen here in America. This is the land of the free. He could not possibly believe that America, where people escape from the tyranny of government, could possibly be in the grip of people of the stripe that now are in power in the central government in the United States, who are presumably your and my elected representatives. You know we didn't elect them. We did everything we could to keep most of them from being elected. What would the ordinary citizen think if they were told that there is a federal law now on the statute books passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the President of the United States, which allows government bureaucrats to keep you from getting the best personalized, private, confidential medical care from your own doctor? What if they told you that bureaucrats now in Washington are drafting regulations to put this legislation into effect? And what if they told you that your doctor couldn't take care of you according to his own judgment, that he could not prescribe the course of treatment, that he could not order the drugs that he thought you needed, that he could not send you to the hospital where and when, in his professional medical judgment, he thought you ought to be hospitalized? He could not keep you in that hospital for the length of period of time that he judged necessary. And even that you couldn't go to the doctor of your choice. Now, I know what you have heard this morning, and you realize that such a law is on the statute books today. But most people, as you walk out of this meeting, will find it impossible, completely incredible, to believe what you have heard and what you know is a fact. But the law is on the books here today. And if the federal government can usurp power clearly not delegated to it by the federal Constitution, so that it can invade the private relationship between you and your physician, I say to you, there is nothing left in this country in the way of freedom, because if they can get away with that, they can get away with anything. You've heard Dr. Jaggard say that neither he nor other members on this panel who are practicing physicians take money from the federal government. There are many doctors, surprisingly enough, who feel this way. They look to their patient. They believe in the Hippocratic oath that they took. They believe that a physician has a nobler calling than to try to get every stinking 30 pieces of silver that he can get. Unfortunately, among the medical profession, as among all professions, there are people who will sell out for 30 pieces of silver. And you all know that story and know it real well. Now, the politicians that slipped this law through Congress in the dying sessions just before the election put in a bill benefits to be supplied by the government, the politicians. They didn't even know what was in the bill. If you will look in the congressional record, the day the debate opened in the Senate, Senator Bennett of Utah, who presumably was the author of the Bennett Amendment, who was not the author thereof, but merely the mouthpiece through whom it was introduced to the Congress, he admitted that the 986-page law in which this portion of the law was buried, there wasn't even a copy on the senators' desks at the time they started the debate, and there was a 1,285-page report on that 986-page bill that was not on the desks of the senators, and not a single one of them had seen it. The reason why this government has gotten out of control is because of the usurpation of power and the appropriation of something like, through local, state, and federal government, 44% of everything that everybody in this country earns. 44%. And the bureaucrats, with the politicians on the Hill, are buying and corrupting people in this country. Now, if you people in this room want to join with Dr. Jaggard, Dr. Jaggard said he changed the history of this country to a degree. The public debt is just that much less than it otherwise have been because he has refused to take that money. And this is where it has to begin, with each one of you people in this audience, with each one of we people on this panel. Each one of us has got to start doing what we believe is right. And if you do not want government bureaucrats to come between you and your doctor, then I shall suggest to you what you might do about it. We have filed suit in the District Court in Chicago and have asked for a declaratory judgment against the federal government to restrain the Secretary of HEW, Mr. Weinberger, from them putting this law into effect. Now, I used the term law. In one technical sense, it is the law. But in a true sense, it is not a law. It has no validity. It is based upon a usurpation of power, and this we intend to show in court. And if the court agrees with us, then all of this machinery that the bureaucrats are busily putting together in Washington, and the boys in the various medical societies are licking their chops, thinking they're going to be able to get this administrative expense money, this whole facade will collapse. Let me repeat something that happened here in Boston 2 years ago. Standing in this very room, in this very position, was the Assistant Vice President of the American Medical Association, Richard Wilbur. He was explaining to the delegates to the AMA convention that was held in this room that he'd been talking with J. Constantine, the staff member of the Senate Finance Committee, and talking about how much money would be available for administrative expenses to carry out this so-called peer review organization law, which has now become a law of the federal government. He explained that Mr. Constantine had said to him that there would be $240 million available to take care of the administrative expenses of operating this surveillance, espionage, police state mechanism whereby government-paid doctors and clerks were going to look over the shoulder of doctors while they're practicing medicine. A delegate got up in the back of the room and said, "We can't afford to let this kind of money get away from the state and county medical societies." The AMA, for a long time, was an advocate of improving the practice of medicine by the establishment of tissue review committees on a voluntary basis. And men like Dr. Dorrity, a leading surgeon in Memphis, Tennessee, and his colleagues, after surgery had been performed, they would examine the reports of the pathologists and see whether or not the very best kind of medicine was being practiced from the standpoint of surgery. This was voluntary. And in talking to our lawyers in connection with this lawsuit, I explained to them how all of these voluntary mechanisms had been built up and how doctors had willingly subjected themselves to each other's judgment as to whether or not they were doing the very best that they could do under the circumstances. This was a voluntary mechanism. And then money out of the federal government began to come into the picture, and the bureaucrats in the medical societies began to see that if they could just get a hold of some of this money, my, how nice and comfortable it would be. So they started working on the rules and regulations of the AMA to twist them around. Now they stuck into a resolution the word structured with respect to these voluntary review mechanisms that had been built up in medicine. Now, how many among you would interpret that word structured to mean that you were going to change it from voluntary to compulsory? None of you would believe that that was what it was. But that was stuck in a resolution and passed, and one of the most astute and clear-minded members who are members of the House of Delegates of the AMA, a member of the AAPS, said he didn't recognize what it meant when it went through. Now these things, the reason I'm telling you about this is that these things become insidious. But the end result is going to be that you are run from the top down here just exactly the way they're being run from the top down in Europe. Now the thing that distinguished this country from Europe was one thing. The citizen was in charge. There was a fellow by the name of Alexis de Tocqueville that came to this country in 1935. He was a French lawyer. He came over here and he traveled around the country for 18 months trying to understand what it was that made America the land of the free and such a great dynamic force in the world. And he was traveling right in this state of Massachusetts with a friend of his. And the buggy they were traveling in banged into a great big hole in the highway and ruined the buggy, broke the wheel. And he started looking at the laws of Massachusetts to find out about this authority coming from the top down like it did in France. And he couldn't find a law, or he couldn't find the structure whereby things were run from the top down. What did he find? He found that the way you kept the road commissioner straight in Massachusetts was that citizen could sue him for malfeasance in office, for failure to take care of that road the way it ought to be taken care of. In other words, the power came from the bottom up. And if you want to understand the brilliant, actually, I believe, God-given brilliance of our Constitution, read Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America. Here is a lawyer from a part of the world that had authority from the top down. He looked at us and he saw that it was authority from the bottom up that made us what we were. Now this dastardly law, which they're trying to impose, says that the bureaucrats from the top down are going to control the relationship between you and your physician. And as incredible as it may seem, the provisions of this law are such that the doctor is presumed to be guilty in anything and everything he does until he proves his innocence. This is not America. This is the other way. Now, as you go to your doctor today, you know that everything you tell him is secret. You know that he is not going to violate your confidence. You know that he's going to find out everything he can about your physical and mental capabilities in order to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to exercise his best skill and judgment in doing the very best he can for you. Under this law, that's all gone. There will be no confidence between you and your physician. All of the records in the doctor's office, in the hospital, they're to be computerized for instant recall, and the law says specifically that this information can be made available by the Secretary of HEW in accordance with rules and regulations issued by the Secretary. This is no longer faith in law or living by the rule of law. This is subjecting the citizenry to the tyranny of individual men bent upon power. Prior to this act of Congress, federal politicians burglarized physicians' files to get confidential information. Under this law, they won't have to stoop to the reprehensible and illegal act of burglary. Snooping into the patient's files would now be legal. Not only will the government keep computerized, detailed, case-by-case files on you, but also everything that your doctor does, so that they can reconstruct a complete pattern of your activities and your doctor. Now, you know what's going to happen. When this gets out, what's a hideous thing has happened. You're not going to tell your doctor everything. And when you don't tell your doctor everything, he's not going to be able to treat you. And not only that, honest doctors are not going to put everything down on the record. They'll try to protect you. But in the effort to protect you, they will have to harm you. They won't be able to remember all of these things that are necessary, that they would look, the prior record, that they would look at that is essential to give you adequate treatment. They'll find themselves in the position of not being able to recall. Now, this is an old story of government tyranny. When Bismarck set up nationalized medicine in Germany, and the politicians promised what they were going to do for people and never telling them what they were doing to people, the cost of medical care in Germany went up dramatically. What did Bismarck and the bureaucrats in Germany do? They hired a group of doctors to be state policemen to look over the shoulders of doctors. And the costs went on up. Then when Lenin got in power, now this was done about 1884 or so in Germany, in that area. In 1917, when Lenin got in power in Russia, he adopted the glorious socialized medicine scheme of Bismarck in Germany, and they put it into effect in Russia. And they had the trouble of the costs going up because it was going to be free. So they put in a police state group of doctors to look over the shoulders of doctors. But the costs kept on going up. So what did the Russians do? The glorious Russians who are for the World Health Organization and the UN and all of the rest of these high-sounding, noble statements, what did they do? They hired an army of agent provocateurs. And what was their job? Their job was to go to the doctor, feign illness, and then when the doctor started taking care of them for what they were complaining about, the doctor was seized and brought into court as being an enemy of society. Now, visualize what a wonderful trust relationship between the doctor and patient that exists in that great, wonderful Soviet socialist republics. When you go into the doctor's office in Russia, he looks at you and he says, I wonder, is this patient really ill? Or is this patient an agent of government trying to trap me? Can you imagine your doctor looking at you that way? And you going to a doctor who looked at all of his patients with no trust, no confidence. And as these men have told you, confidence and trust, mutual confidence and trust between doctor and patient is the very essence of good medicine. It's the very essence of freedom. It's the very essence that this Polish doctor believed in. It's the thing that he thought the other side of it is the thing that he thought he'd gotten away from when he risked his life to get away from that regimented society. Now, what can you do about it? Here we are in Boston. It's late. The government is in one hell of a shape. And everybody here knows it is true. Confidence in politicians is at a new low ebb. But look, all that's happened with all of this circus that's going on in Washington is they have just merely pulled back the edge of the rug and let you look under and get a glimpse of the rottenness of the federal government. You were told, oh, look, they're crooked in Boston. They're crooked in Chicago. Daley is a machine politician. Now, you can expect rotten politics at the city level, and you can expect pretty rotten politics at the state level. But when you get to the national level, it's noble. And the public interest is what these servants of government are trying to carry out. Tommy Rot. City politics, county politics, state politics, that's just the minor leagues. The big leagues is in Washington. And if anybody thinks this began to happen with this administration, I can mention just a name or two. Bobby Baker, Earl Clements, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And don't kid yourself, his wife was never rich until after Lyndon was in government. Now, here's what you can do. First, you can write your congressmen and your senators and demand that they take action to get this PSRO law repealed. The reason why these politicians do what they do is they think they're getting by with murder. They don't think you know. And if enough of you demonstrate that you know, they're going to start to be uncomfortable. So sit down and write your congressman and tell him what the score is. Now, in case you don't have the machinery or the detail that you'd like to have, here's a pamphlet that we've put out on questions and answers on the PSRO law, and attached here too is a copy, a verbatim copy of the law itself. You can see the questions and answers. You can also see the law. And if you don't like the answers to the questions, read the law yourself. There it is. I'll guarantee you it's in gobbledygook, but nevertheless it's there. Second, you can tell your friends about this law, and you can suggest to them that they also make it clear to your senators and congressmen. Make it clear that the lawmakers are interfering between the patient and the physician, and that this violates your idea of freedom. Tell them you want the politicians to stop trampling on the constitutional rights of both you and your doctor. And if you need any information, get a hold of us, and we'll do what we can to be helpful. Tom, as you know, I'm an old bureaucrat. I was in the New Deal myself, and I found out that it was a long ways from being the kind of public interest that was being spread and told to the people. Our trouble started when Harry Hopkins said, and the New Deal administration started to try to carry it out. The secret to power is to spend and spend and tax, elect and elect. Morality, ethics, has nothing to do with it. I would like to visit with you for a long, long time about the many, many things that I know of personally that have happened. I got out of it. I couldn't stand it. I've been trying to do everything I could to help straighten it out since then. But with this, I'll say goodbye, and if we can answer any questions in the next few minutes, it'll be helpful. We'll be glad to do so.